Wherever the corpse is, there the eagles will gather, which simply means, by analyzing also the text in Greek, that he gives them a metaphor of reference to let them understand that wherever they are, they will be spotted and taken in the same way as an eagle, by the way the original term is vulture, spots and takes its own prey. The woman, the dragon, and Babylon. All civilizations of the past have made, let's say, some contact with beings coming from the sky. Over time, it was clear that all of this was not due to chance. It was 1975. I love saying that I had all my hair. So, I was a boy, I was a teenager, I was 17 years old. I wasn't alone. We were a gang, 5, 6 boys. At some point, we got this idea, since there was someone older than us who was already following Eugenio, that is Salvatore, this idea of creating a study center cosmic brotherhood. Big words, one after another. Well, either it has been for overcoming boredom or it has been for something stimulating us. All right, we said. We said yeah, and we have created, or anyway, tried to create this, let's say, ideal organization. But all in all, it was, after all, idealistic, with few formal inclines in this respect, right? Regarding my experience, when we were talking about extraterrestrials and ufology, I remember that I even used to laugh, because since I knew the Bible, let's say, fairly well for my age, I used to argue that if there were extraterrestrials, the Bible would have talked about it, right? Of course, it wasn't like this, because later I have realized that the Bible is full of references to extraterrestrial or angelic civilizations, whatever they are. Anyway, back to the topic. The first brochures and, how to say, written reports and so on began to arrive. Back in the day, it was a great amount of stuff produced by Eugenio through messages he used to receive, through writings, through many more things. Well, by reading this, I remember my first impressions. It was a tremendous trauma for me. It was as if I had met, how to say it, as if I had found out what I realized it instinctively, what was going to solve all of my existential problems, or all of the existential problems in, let's say, general terms. Gradually I have been understanding that this language, which fascinated me, especially Adonias's language, as I remember, was going to translate in modern terms, therefore adherent to the reality of the 20th century, those which actually were all the ancient teachings, which were ingrained in the Gospel as common denominator, and therefore the Christos. It was clear to me from the very first moment, and truth be told, it wasn't clear only to me, but also to the many friends, well, actually brotherly friends, with whom we began this journey. Over time, it was clear that all of this was not due to chance, right? I might sound, I don't know, pathetic or in search of grandeur, but it's not like that. It was not the result of chance. Later I reconnected with something, for example, something very personal. At 7, 8 years old, I found myself with a Bible in my hands. My grandfather was an evangelist, and I was fascinated with Revelation, that is, John's book and the prophecies. Of course, I understood. I used to read what I couldn't understand because I could read, but I couldn't, how to say, fathom the whole thing, because of course I lacked experience, I lacked so many things. Then, later on, still a deep incentive for the research in the prophetic field, I fell in love with Nostradamus too, so I've been looking for books in order to understand and comprehend what eventually was the famous eschatological discourse, which resonates perfectly with the prophecies spoken by the Master himself in the Gospels. Then he told me, "Do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this scroll, because the time is near. Let the one who does wrong continue to do wrong. Let the vile person continue to be vile. Let the one who does right continue to do right, and let the holy person continue to be holy." Let's stay a little longer on the figure of Eugenio. I wanted to ask you again how crucial has been the type of messages which Eugenio reported to you in your personal information and in the research that you have done. Let's say that it was all part of a plan, because, you see, the story of Eugenio, his methodology, his preaching, in quotes, concerned the call to humanity away from sin, to say it in a, well, kinda big manner. Therefore, the highlighting of all that meant, let's say, sin, from nuclear energy to the production of weapons, the monopoly of natural resources, and, of course, the consequences are poverty, inequality, to end up with the exploitation of the young. He used an image like chips on the game board of power, drugs, and so much more, whereas there was this critical view on sin in quotes of humanity in the face of the desiderata, wishes and requests of the cosmic law, which certainly overcomes space and time, and obviously of who has represented it in an exemplary manner in our recent civilization, that is, Jesus the Christ. So we have embraced, how to say, perfectly also this view that was to condemn and censure the evils produced by man, at least in terms of political, environmental, and, if you wish, spiritual ethics. Of course, in the writings of the Old Testament, besides Revelation, there are other authors who make reference to some prophetic situations. In the messages received back then by Eugenio, was there reference also to these authors, or was it only to the work of John? Yes, in the messages received by Eugenio, the references were rare, just to literally answer. Anyway, what you are saying is true. There are some to the Old Testament. Daniel, for example. Something about Daniel, but very vaguely. The rest, the bulk, was the words of the Master, of Jesus, at least those recorded in the four so-called canonical Gospels, and of course particularly those of Revelation 2. These are, let's say, the scriptural references shining forth from Eugenio Siragusa's extraterrestrial messages. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Book of Revelation by John. So now let's give a more detailed picture of how it was when you found out the connection between the writings of the Old Testament and these extraterrestrial beings. What were the evidence which gave you that certainty that also in the writings of the Old Testament there was the presence of this reality? Certainly, at some point after your initial and unaware reading back in the day, then something clicked in order for you to get to a perspective, to a more detailed picture. Yeah, let's say that since what we named as awakening took place, there's been on two fronts. There's been a pressing desire to reread all of the Gospel, which I already knew. I mean, I for one knew them all four, although obviously not in detail, however, for sure, at a level, as they say, higher than normal. The strong desire to re-evaluate the teachings of the Gospel, the events, the statements, in short, Jesus' precepts, in a different light, which was the light of spiritual depth. That's to say, to understand the real meaning behind the apparent sentence. The other aspect, a need which was mine, and here I come to your request, was the fact to go and frame all of those fantastic and let's say phenomenal aspects through in light of UFO events and this new knowledge which has come out since 1945 and 1950. So there was also this need. Obviously, this has also led us to relate with ancient history, and then to reevaluate and reconsider in a different light as well what was the contact of many civilizations with the gods who descended from heaven, who used to come actually from space, because in the end it's just a matter of semantics. So this also led us to reevaluate in another light all of these prodigies, miracles, and unbelievable stuff. And this led us to adopt a concept of history and historiography which is different from the, say, traditional and official one. So we have ascertained, moreover, there are distinguished scholars who have deeply delved into this. We have ascertained that all of the civilizations of the past have had contact with beings coming from the sky. The definitions were different. Sons of the flame, gods, Elohim, angels in our Judeo-Christian tradition, and so on. Anyway, this is a planetary constant too. This has clearly reinforced what we have learned through Eugenio Siragusa and the other contactees who turned up too, right? But from this point of view, it is really pivotal to the point where we have understood that the Christic Advent, so the advent of this wonderful figure who was born of Mary, is linked to all this reality. Then, within you, it has strengthened the belief that the second coming of Christ is not to be considered as symbolic storytelling, but, on the contrary, a real event, which must certainly happen. Yes, we certainly believe in this. Look, I hear many people talking about the coming of Christ as Christic consciousness. Well, I wouldn't say this is just New Age stuff because there is some truth in this statement. Actually, the coming of a new consciousness of Christic nature is already here, it's developing. But what are the first words of the Acts of the Apostles? When the apostles were, well, a little astonished in seeing this Jesus was, let's say, taken inside this cloud, which was not a cloud, then two men dressed in white garments stood suddenly beside them, and they told the apostles, Men of Galilee, do not be afraid. This Jesus who has been taken up from you into heaven will return in the same way as you have seen him going into heaven. I believe in this prophecy, and just like me, a great deal of people believe in it. The return of Christ in power and glory, and it will be physical. Also physically, as well as obviously the expansion of the Christic consciousness, which will be even greater with his return. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Blessed are those who wash their robes, so that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter the city by its gates. But outside are the dogs, the sorcerers, the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. Book of Revelation by John. Of course, your words have reminded me of another experience, and for sure Eugenio Siragusa has been crucial there too. An experience which is just as significant for our talks, our meetings. And this is a narration by Giorgio di Bitonto. He wrote that book, I don't know if you know it, Angels in Starships, where he experienced contact with these beings. In his narration too, he is deeply convinced that it is not just a metaphor, but that the return of this entity, let's call it so, is sure and certain, and it's going to be in the flesh, and his tales suggest that it's going to be on a starship. Same narration by the contactee Marina Tonini, who said that during her contact experience it was revealed to her that the return of Jesus will be precisely coming from an elsewhere on a starship. But so, are we dealing with a physical being in the flesh presently stationed on a more evolved planet or on another dimensional plane? What do you think about it? Well, I don't know, maybe I'd be more inclined for the other dimensional plane, which anyway interpenetrates ours as well. Jesus, such as other very few prophets, was one who ascended to heaven in the flesh, right? And in the flesh he shall remain, at least the being. Besides, Jesus is also Christ was subtle in his words. He talked about the Son of Man. That's to say, a human being. That's what it means. Who would be back by representing, of course, and embodying what we are awaiting. The spaceship, I know that this term still scandalizes someone, but in reality, in the Old Testament and in the New Testament as well, the clouds are the so-called clouds of glory from the Hebrew language, and it never gets translated, which aren't really the meteorological ones, but to have a comparison also with their history, they are those which the Hebrew people witnessed at the exit from Egypt, so the pillar clouds and other events. So we are talking about, they call them clouds of glory, but it's not water vapor, right? So there's this terminology with which we had to interface, which we had to decipher, and then explain to many. Today it's easier to talk about that. At this point I'm asking you, how far has the theological construction of the last 2,000 years driven us away from a proper understanding of what was happening to ordinary people? Of course, in those writings there is a whole posthumous construction of the original teachings. So how much of this construction has later been misleading for a real comprehension of what actually happened at the time of Jesus? Look, from the standpoint of the special effects, I would say from a phenomenological standpoint, unfortunately it remains linked and bound to our ability to investigate and comprehend. I understand that in the past centuries, probably even for me, for everyone, it would have been hard to be able to comprehend and understand. If you notice, in Luke 17:37, when the apostles, the disciples, asked Jesus, he's talking about pickups. And how is it going to happen? Jesus cannot tell them starships will come and pick you up because they wouldn't understand it, since they cannot interface with this reality. So Jesus goes to answer with a phrase that has endured as classic and enigmatic. Wherever the corpse is, there the eagles will gather, which simply means, by analyzing also the text in Greek, that he gives them a metaphor of reference to let them understand that wherever they are, since earlier they were saying that two men will be in a place, one will be taken and the other left, wherever they are, they will be spotted and taken in the same way as an eagle, by the way the original term is vulture, spots and takes its own prey. So, from this point of view, I can understand without doubt that there was some difficulty over the centuries. But Christ also promised, close to the eschatological times, the arrival or the appearance of the Paraclete, of the Spirit of Truth. Beware that it's not just the little flames, I mean, it's also them, for God's sake. He was talking about a human entity, a man. All that he has heard and listened to in secret, he will tell you again, because there are things that you cannot understand right now, since you cannot handle them. Of course, it's, let's say, the mental and, well, psychic limitation of the baby man of 2,000 years ago who could not comprehend what we comprehend nowadays. This is one aspect. There is another significant aspect to answer your question. 2,000 or 1,700 years of theology have been undermined in a really tragic and scary way by banning the most important thing, which is the law of rebirth. Reincarnation? Yes, reincarnation. To have denied the knowledge of men. But until 365 AD, I guess, until the first council, it was in 326 AD, there was the Council of Nicaea, but they determined whether Jesus were human or divine, whether he were begotten or created by the Father, right? But yeah, they began from there. Then it was in the Council of Constantinople, circa 540 AD, a council convened by no pope. The pope didn't even go there. I guess his name was Virgil. He did not attend. It was convened by Justinian and by that spirited little fellow who was his wife Theodora. For political reasons that are easy to guess, they came to condemn the law of reincarnation. They came to condemn this idea, resulting in scary abysses and gaps in the consciences of men, of believers, because the evolution of the spirit was denied. Even today, this concept of evolution officially does not exist, and some situations were then created. The evolution of the spirit through experiences, yes, through experiences in the matter, because it's an ongoing evolution, it's an ongoing growth of experience, until you, let's say, saturate the basic learning, and then you get closer to the Christic paragon in order to perfect yourself. That's it. They have denied this. They have said there is salvation or damnation, there is hell, heaven, and purgatory. Therefore, keeping billions of beings in ignorance for so many centuries, and making Jesus' prophetic words come true. You hypocrites! He was addressing scribes and Pharisees, but obviously fits perfectly for the Catholic Church. You tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but you yourselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. All of these taboos, this whole sin thing, basically, which is in everything and so on. How close to the truth is this interpretation that Eugenio then were the last reincarnation of John the Apostle, who gave us in Patmos the revelation of the Apocalypse? How plausible is it in your opinion?